Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video, and the subject of today's video is going to be on the Oklahoma City Thunder, and specifically Steven Adams of the Oklahoma City Thunder. This may seem really out of left field right now, but the reason I'm making this video is because the Thunder recently traded Paul George, which a lot of people did not see coming, but basically a report came out after that we didn't know it, but the Thunder stars, Westbrook and Paul George, were actually pretty unhappy with the Thunder situation. They wanted them to either trade them or make some moves to improve the team. And the Thunder are going in the rebuild direction as they just traded Paul George for essentially 5 first-round picks, 2 pick swaps, which is essentially 2 more first-round picks. So honestly, around 7 first-round picks and Danilo Gallinari and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's coming off of his rookie year. So I think that's a clear sign that they could potentially continue contending right now, but they might lean towards just blowing it up and doing a rebuild. Well, if they do go for that rebuild, or if they're just trying to continue to improve, I have some trade scenarios that I've devised to send away Steven Adams and get some returns, and I will be going through those today. And I'll preface each one with telling you whether I think it's a move to rebuild or a move to continue to be a contender. So the first one I have here is um, a straight up swap of Steven Adams for Drew Holiday. This would be a move to continue to contend right away. Drew Holiday's in the middle of his prime. He's like 29, I think going on 30 next year. He could be a good combo guard, but he could play shooting guard next to Westbrook. You could have a three-headed monster of Drew Holiday, Westbrook, and Dennis Schroeder as your backcourt, sort of like the Detroit Pistons when they had uh, Dumars, Isaiah Thomas, and Vinnie Johnson. Although this would be a much weaker version of that, this would still be some sort of three-headed monster of guards. So they could continue contending, and the lineup with this guy in there would be like Westbrook, Drew Holiday, probably Roberson, Danilo Gallinari, and at center you'd probably have Nerlens Noel, and then off the bench you'd have Jeremy Grant and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Dennis Schroeder as your main guys. So they'd still be a good team, and so that would work out pretty well for them. He's a good scorer and a first-team All-Defender. And then for New Orleans, they're kind of lacking a center option right now. They just signed Derek Favors, but I don't think he's going to be physical enough or athletic enough to play center, and so I think Steven Adams is a good alternative. And so for New Orleans, after this trade, your lineup would look like Lonzo Ball, J.J. Redick, Brandon Ingram, Zion, and then you'd have Steven Adams with a very deep bench of Josh Hart, Etuan Moore, Derek Favors, Jahlil Okafor. So they'd have still a pretty deep team, and I would like this trade a lot for both teams. In that New Orleans gets a young guy to build with their core, and Drew Holiday gets to go to an immediate playoff contender where he can play well off of Westbrook because he can space it and play off ball. The next trade I have here would be another immediate contender trade for Oklahoma City, and that would be Steven Adams to Dallas in exchange for Tim Hardaway Jr., Courtney Lee, and Max Kleber. So Oklahoma City, after this trade, their starting lineup would be looking like probably Westbrook, Courtney Lee, Tim Hardaway Jr., Danilo Gallinari, and Nerlens Noel, with a bench of Dennis Schroeder, Andre Robertson, Max Kleber, Patrick Patterson, Jeremy Grant. So they would have a lot of depth, and of course they could start like Roberson over Tim Hardaway Jr. and stuff like that. But basically, their main dudes after this trade would be Westbrook, Hardaway Jr., Courtney Lee, Schroeder, Jeremy Grant, Nerlens Noel, Danilo Gallinari, Andre Roberson. So they'd look pretty good. And then for Dallas, they don't really have a great center option right now. They did just re-sign Porzingis and Dwight Powell, but both those guys basically prefer to be power forwards. So you could have a starting lineup that would look like, let's see here. Starting lineup could look like J.J. Barea. Then at the 2, you'd probably have Seth Curry. At the 3, Doncic. At the 4, Porzingis. And at the 5, Steven Adams. So that would bring some good physicality to this team and a tough guy in the center to protect Porzingis, who's a softer player and more of a finesse player. So I think that this trade would work pretty well for OKC, and that they'd get shooting and spacing and perimeter defense. And then as for Dallas, they'd get a solid center that they can start right away. And he's only 25. That's the thing with Steven Adams. He works well going to a lot of younger teams because he's only 25, and even though he's been in the league for 6 years. So that's what makes him a prime contender to go to any rebuilding team or just young team in general. Next trade I have is Steven Adams to the Hawks for Chandler Parsons and a first round pick or 2 first-round picks, depending on how hard of a bargain OKC drives. But this trade would basically be Steven Adams for the draft picks. Chandler Parsons is literally just salary filler in this. As for OKC, this would definitely be a rebuilding move. If they're also looking to move off of Westbrook, this would be a good trade in that they could get some first-round picks in exchange for Steven Adams and look to continue to rebuild. And then as for the Hawks, it makes a lot of sense in that they would be getting a guy who could start center right away for them, and he could be a pretty effective player. Your starting lineup for the Hawks would look like something like Trae Young, Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter probably, and then you're gonna have John Collins and Steven Adams with like Kevin Huerter, Alan Crabb, and Evan Turner coming off the bench. So they'd have a pretty good starting lineup. I would trust Steven Adams quite a bit. And then as far as OKC, let's say that they do play out this trade scenario, starting lineup is going to look like Westbrook, Robertson, Gallinari, Jeremy Grant, Nerlens Noel with Parsons, Schroeder, Patterson, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander coming off the bench. So they would lose a good guy, but I mean they'd be getting the 2 first-round picks in return, so that would be what would make it worth their while. And again, this would be looking towards a rebuilding thing, so that was why this trade would make sense. Next trade I have is Steven Adams to the Sacramento Kings. So I have Oklahoma City getting Bogdan Bogdanovic, Kosta Koufos, and Nyamji Bjelica in exchange for Steven Adams. Maybe a first-round pick too if OKC again drives a really hard bargain. But what do you get if you're OKC? You get 2 guys that can space it wonderfully in Bogdanovic and Bjelica, and then you get cap space filler in Kosta Koufos. So this could be seen as either a rebuild trade or just like we're looking to contend, but with spacing rather than with a big bulky Steven Adams. So their starting lineup after this could look something like Westbrook, Robertson, Gallinari, Bjelica, Nerlens Noel with a bench of Schroeder, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Bogdanovic, Jeremy Grant, Patrick Patterson. So they'd again be really deep. And then for the Kings, you have basically a core of De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, Trevor Ariza, Harrison Barnes, Steven Adams. Then coming off your bench, you'd probably have Marvin Bagley and then Harry Giles and Yogi Ferrell. This fills a big hole in that Willie Cauley-Stein is leaving, and the Kings didn't really try to re-sign him at all, so this would basically fill his void. And I think Willie Cauley-Stein's like 24 and Steven Adams is 25, so it's not too big of a difference as far as age gap, and so he'd still work with this younger core, because I think Buddy Hield is going to be 24 and De'Aaron Fox is going to be like 22, and he's only 25, and Harrison Barnes is only like 26, so this is still a relatively young core and would work pretty well having all these guys playing together. Steven Adams doesn't really space the floor at all for this team, but neither did Willie Cauley-Stein, and they were still pretty successful with that crew, winning 39 games last year, and they're definitely on the come up. So I like the idea of that team. I like the idea of that team with Steven Adams on there. And then the last trade here, which would definitely be a rebuild for Oklahoma City, it would be Steven Adams to the Spurs for 2 first-round picks. Patty Mills, Davis Bertans, and Jakob Poeltl. So total rebuild for the Oklahoma City Thunder. This would be like if they'd already traded Westbrook maybe. You get Jakob Poeltl, who's like 21. He can start at center. You get Davis Bertans, who can space it. He's a nice young piece. And you get Patty Mills, who essentially would be salary cap filler. And then the 2 first-round picks is really what you're doing this trade for. You're not doing it for any of the guys necessarily in particular, except for maybe Poeltl and maybe Bertans if he really develops. But it's essentially 2 first-round picks and salary cap filler for Steven Adams. And for the Spurs, they haven't really had a great option at center, but now you could plug in Steve. You could have a potentially a lineup of like DeJounte Murray, DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, LaMarcus Aldridge, Steven Adams. That's a very good starting lineup. Can hold its own on defense. They're very big and can challenge any team physically, and so I like this team, and I think that they would be an improvement from what they are right now, and I think that they would um, definitely be a playoff team if they made that trade, which they might not be as the things currently stand in the NBA right now. So there you have it, guys. 5 trades for Steven Adams. He's a pretty easy guy to trade in that although he plays at a position that is um, very populated at center. Like almost every team has a adequate starting center. Because of his age, he's pretty easy to trade. His contract's pretty tough at 25 million a year, but because of his young age, he kind of fits well on a bunch of rebuilding or teams or teams that are just young and on the come up. So he's a pretty guy to come up with trade scenarios for. That being said, feel free to leave your trade scenarios below or just comment or critique mine. I'd love to hear some feedback or comments in general. I hope you guys have a good day and enjoy the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.